Well, welcome. Happy Thursday and welcome to Mindful Moments. And I'm Tawana. And every Thursday at 12:30 I am here to pause on purpose and align and rebuild how we live, how we love, and how we lead in real life with real practical tools and tips. And so, 30 minutes, we're here, and I am just going to go ahead and get started. So, let's just take a deep breath and really make space to hear God louder than the noise around us. While we're doing this and we're getting set and where everybody's coming in, I am streaming on Instagram and YouTube. And so be sure to go ahead and click the link that's scrolling on or copy the link that's scrolling on YouTube. It's not scrolling on Instagram, but you can go ahead and just hit share on there to your peeps if this is something that helps you. Welcome who's here. I'll give you a moment to go ahead and share it with those so that they can chime in as well and take a mindful moment. Again, every Thursday at 12:30. And you can also visit the website that is scrolling or the website in my bio so that you can catch other on-demand live coaching such as this. But today, I want to really explore and really unpack the notion of checking back. And I'm talking about like, I heard you, but I really want to be clear, kind of checking back. Because I think sometimes we think that we only need to hear instructions or directions once, or we feel we should only need to hear them once. And if we need to check back, then we weren't really listening the first time or we're being irresponsible. Now, if we think about it, for parents, how many times have we told our own children something, and when they come back to ask a question, we say things like, see, you weren't listening. Or if you were listening the first time, you would know what to do. And I've shared in several times, and it's on my social, that I was a high school principal at one time, and I principaled through the pandemic, running a school remotely in the midst of also building a facility to accommodate the growth that the high school was being faced with. And so, before I even go on, I just want to stop right there because it would be irresponsible of me not to say and give a shout out to all of my fellow educators. Hey, cousin, all of my fellow educators for pushing through and just making it out of what is seen to be one of the most difficult times in education. And so, um, yeah, I want to give a shout out to them. Like when we taught, led all the things through the pandemic, we done that with for the educators who's done that with grace and compassion and all that they had to endure during that time. I would just say that no one should ever question our qualifications for that time. And so just wanted to give that little plug and that shout out there, but I digress. So let's get back to our topic. And I already told you too before that I am a real nerd when it comes to understanding and being really interested in how people behave and how they interpret the world around them. Drop an emoji in the chat, in the chat if you are someone who just get really fascinated. Like, don't leave me out here by myself. With people, how they interact, how they behave, and how they just kind of interpret their world around them. And one area that I can say in during my principalship that I grew in my development and leadership during that pandemic time was in the area of empathy. And when that first word was introduced to me 20 some odd years ago, from my own principal when I was in the classroom, I'm going to be honest, I thought it was a made up word. I was like, he just made that up. And I was here in the South, and I am from the North, and I was like, that must be a Southern slang word, right? And but then it dawned on me like he's not from the South. He's also from the North. He was Canadian. I was like, maybe it is a real word. But 20 some years later, I can say during the pandemic when I led as a principal, that was an area that I was being developed in empathy and understanding others' vantage points. And I saw firsthand that just because something was clear to me does not always mean it was clear to others, and how we all have different lenses that develop our thoughts and our understanding. So, active listening was also refined, empathy was being strengthened, and I was learning to really seek more understanding of who I was working with, not just my staff or my students or the parents or even my colleagues, but also my own children and other people that I was coming in contact with every day. And I learned that communicating to understanding is so rewarding, and it is really big when building relationships. And I was a grown years old, just learning that. And so in that, I mean, even getting granular with it. And you can call me crazy, but just hear me out for a second because I'm really going to go somewhere with this. So stay with me. So if I tell someone something as simple as go stand next to that red chair, and they start scrambling around, looking lost, or even acting as if they did not hear me or like they weren't listening, that would be pretty upsetting. And in fact, you could get pretty annoyed and respond with agitation, giving the direction again, but then this time with a more sarcastic or condescending tone. But hear me out, because you just we just spoke about the benefit of the doubt in a previous session, and to communicate for understanding, we could ask, "Do you see the red chair?" And not be sarcastic or condescending, but asking for understanding, because they could actually respond and say, "No, but I see an orange one." Or they could just say no, to which we could ask, what color chairs do you see? And in fact, that could actually probably be the first question that we ask. Instead of saying, do you see the red chair? We could probably just start off with this a general question like, what color chairs do you see? Because I'm about to blow your mind. Did you know that you are the only one who has ever seen out of your own eyeballs? Like, mind blowing, right? You probably never even thought about it this way, but now that you are thinking about it this way, we go through life thinking that the way that we see things is the only way to see them. And this thought opened me up so deeply in my intrigue of understanding people and how they behave and how they interpret the world, for how I communicate better to build relationships. My communication shifted with the focus on communicating for clarity and not just for giving direction. And to do that, I had to put my pride aside. I had to put it down. I had to set my ego aside and make it take a back seat to this whole interaction. And I had to open up to others asking the question why, recognizing that it was not, in most cases, a question of my authority or my judgment, but it was a question of perception and understanding. And this thought opened me up to, like I said, deepen my intrigue and my understanding for other individuals. And they were asking me those questions, and they're trying to get understanding and trying to get a perspective. I had to realize that they were essentially trying to put on my lens so they could see through my eyes, the eyes that I only see through. And I had to be open to questions and not assume that just because I thought it through, just because I felt that I was super duper clear, doesn't mean that they won't have questions. I am the only one who sees through my eyes. So, what I did was I started, during my principalship, and I kept it going on when we went back into the building. But I started what was called clarity, and I'll spell that so you can get the full gist. It was CLARIT and then dash TEA, and that was called Clarity Time, with Wiggins. And this time was set aside outside of my regular office availability time, where staff could, come in, come to me and have some tea, hence the TEA portion of it, and clarity, and get some clarity. During that time, they could ask clarifying questions. They could, ask about the week's agenda. They can ask direction or focus, all of those types of things without feeling judged or looked at like you should already know that, or weren't you listening, or why weren't you listening the first time, or you shouldn't have any type questions, type vibes being given to them. And the T portion of that was very intentional for the purpose of setting that judgment free zone and that judgment free atmosphere. And here's where I learned the power of the comeback. And so the question that I propose is, how do you know if you heard it right if you don't have the opportunity to come back or check back. And I know we may think if I'm continually asking God questions or checking back to be sure of what he said, I must not have faith. And I must not be listening, or I must not have been listening. But that's not a lack of faith, that or irresponsibilityness. That is what culture would have us to believe. But checking back or coming back, as you can see in the examples that I provided, it actually deepens relationships. And having the option to ask and ask again builds connections. It really builds trust and comfort. And coming back is really a posture of dependence and humility. And if you think about it, understanding that I don't have God's lens. So I need to check back to continue to get to match my lens with his. And that's called alignment. And if you could get direction and be moving, or you could get direction and you could be moving a certain way, but checking back just helps you to adjust if you start to veer in the wrong direction. And that's recognizing that you are human. So just like our cars, we have to go get a wheel alignment more than once to make sure that when we steer our car in one direction, it desire and not begins to veer off in another way, because the road wears and tears on our cars, causing our tires to needing to be realigned. And just like that, life wears and tears on us, and God is our mechanic, so we can come back and get realigned. And so I wanted to be able to explore this through a biblical lens and see in areas where God honored the comeback, so that we can create some alignment in this, in the way that we're living and loving and leading lives in a practical sense. And so if we look at Gideon, and if you're not familiar with Gideon, I'll give you just a little bit of a context. So typically when you hear about Gideon, you hear that Gideon saw himself as weak. And so Gideon is attributed to just weak, like he didn't see himself as being strong. So we actually equate Gideon as weak. And this is also because in the Bible, typically the verse that is associated with him oftentimes, and I'm looking at Judges 6, verse 15. And he says, and this is the NLT version, but he says, "But Lord, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least of my entire family." And just a little bit of context about Manasseh. Manasseh was one of the two sons of Joseph. The other son was Ephraim, and these were both also two tribes of Israel. And the tribe of Ephraim was considerably stronger of the both two of Manasseh and Ephraim. And and in contrast, Manasseh was much weaker because of their position. So typically, when you hear about the two tribes, Manasseh is the weak one, Ephraim was the stronger one. And so here, as I was reading and studying, here is something that I wanted to take note of in verse 15, the verse right before, or verse 14, the verse right before this. God tells Gideon, "I'm sending you." He did not ask, and I want to emphasize the word you, because he did not ask or did not mention anything about Manasseh, as Gideon mentioned in his response. But Gideon sees himself actually through the lens of his association. And now this was, as I was preparing for this wasn't part of what I was preparing, but I do feel the need to mention that as we look here. Sometimes you have to disassociate, even from those that are in your tribe or your family, to really see yourself. And this is not meaning that you disown them, but you cannot take on your identity through them or through your association. Because of Gideon's association, he could only see himself through the lens and not for all he has accomplished despite his circumstances. Like, I mean, as I looked up his name in Hebrew literally means great destroyer or warrior. And I want to break down some of this, what I saw when I was reading, because I didn't see weak. In Judges chapter 6, really just trying to understand Gideon, I was looking for justification for Gideon being always considered as weak, as every time you hear anything about him. And in my mind, I saw him, every time I hear Gideon, I saw him as this scrawny, little timid guy, because that's just the character that I made up in my mind of him. But when you read through Judges 6 and you go from verses 1 through 20, and I won't read all of that to save time, But in those passages, here's where you see Gideon threshing wheat in the winepress, and he's seeking confirmation of God's voice, of the voice of God that came to him. And these things don't seem strong on the surface, but if you hear me out, because it will make sense in the moment, I'm going to break that down and explain that for you. So Gideon doesn't see himself as strong. He doesn't see the strength in himself here. And sometimes you do have to step back to even disassociate yourself from your circumstances so that you can take inventory of what you have done despite your odds. Because when you're in it, you can't see it. But when you step out and you look at what you've accomplished through it, then you can now be able to make a greater determination of your identity. And let me break that down even further. As I was reading, like I said, I didn't see a weak individual. I see a cautious one and one who is living on constant survival. And if you don't know the story of what was going on, Gideon's family was really being real time, real, real bullied by the Midianites. And in Judges 6, the beginning of Judges 6 and 2, chapter 6, excuse me, verses 2 and 3, it gives you a description of what was going on. So it says the Midianites, they were cruel, they were so cruel, is what the Bible says, that the Israelites made hiding places from them. And they were hiding out, and they were hiding in mountains, they were hiding in caves, they were made strongholds. And in this instance, that is, they made fortified places to protect themselves from the Midianites. And when they planted crops, the Midianites, among others, because they all saw them as weak because they were being able to be overtaken by the Midianites, others would attack and they would destroy their crops. They would leave them with nothing to eat, and they would take their cattle and their transportation, like their donkeys and things like that, and they would ambush them in their tents and strip them literally bare, reducing them to starvation of their food and their belongings. So they were being real time bullied. And so here we find in this verse 11, we find Gideon at the bottom of the wine press, and he's threshing wheat. Um, and here he's hiding from the Midianites in this space. And again, this type of hiding, I don't see Gideon hiding out of fear of having a timid personality. He is truly trying to survive and still doing what needs to be done despite these bullies that are just showing up and overtaking everything. And so typically, when you think about weak, that would equate as giving up. But instead, Gideon found a workaround to do what needed to be done. The bully's actions didn't stop the show. In this case, it only stopped the way that he was used to doing it. So he had to do it a different way. It stopped the way that he was used to doing it before. And so now he had to pivot. And so here I see Gideon as being strategic. And that takes skill. When you have to think of strategies, I don't see that as being weak. That takes serious skill. And he knew that the wine press would provide an environment that would not expose him to danger of ambush. In that space, the Midianites would not see, when you're threshing wheat, the pieces that are no good are flying in the air. And so if you see that, then you know wheat is being thrashed over there. And so he knew that being down in the wine press, that it wasn't a place where they would know what was happening, and then he could be ambushed. So it took some skill there. And then Gideon was requesting confirmation of God's voice in verses 17 through 21. And I feel like from what Gideon had to do for his family, him requesting confirmation of God's voice and his presence, that also was strategic. So this is strategy and survival, and not like a simple timid behavior. And yes, it is cautious, but cautiousness is wisdom at times when you live under constant survival, bullying, and threatening circumstances. So now that we have a understanding of who Gideon is, I want to now talk about the comeback. And so if we go over to Judges 6, verses 17, excuse me, Gideon asked God this question. He says, if you are truly going to help me, show me a sign to prove that it is really the Lord speaking to me. This is, again, that strategic confirmation that I was talking about. Gideon was asking for, and I almost missed this. I almost missed what happened in verse 18. because I almost stopped reading at 17. But he was asking for confirmation. But in 18, he says, don't go away I until I come back. And I was like, oh man, I had already titled it and I didn't see like, oh wow, how the Lord was speaking through this. But he says, don't go away until I come back and bring my offering to you. Gideon makes a request. He wants to be sure of God's character and of the validity of who was speaking. Then he comes back to verify and allow God to show who he is, to show for God to show his character. And so the title of this is The Power of the Comeback. And so here is PowerPoint number 1 of the comeback. Coming back or checking back creates space for integrity to be revealed. Coming back or checking back creates space for integrity to be revealed. Circling back gives the opportunity to really show you if words and actions line up. That is how integrity is uncovered. So when we move and look at verse 20, Gideon comes back, he presents his offering, and the Lord proves himself through a divine fire. And then moving to verse 21 through 32, Gideon does a brave thing. He makes a courageous stand now that he knows God will help him. And you can read all about that on your own time. I won't go too much in detail from there. So that's just a quick summary of it. But when we get to Judges 6, verses 36 through 37, Gideon comes back again. And this time saying, if you are truly going to use me to rescue Israel, as you promised, prove it to me in this way. And now Gideon presents a very specific request to God that sounds like a magic trick. And in summary, Gideon's asking, he's going to put a dry fleece on the ground, and in the morning, the fleece will be wet and the ground will be dry. And then I will know. And Lord, God did it, right? Then Gideon wanted to be really sure, so comes back again. And at this moment, as a human, you're like, come on, are you serious? But he comes back again. And in verse 39, he says, please don't be angry, because this is how we think. But God's not like us. We think that if I say, okay, if I ask you one more time, you're going to be mad at me, you're going to be angry, but God is not like us. And he asked for the reverse. Next time, make the fleece dry and make the ground wet. And guess what? Yep, it happened again. And there is so much power in this that I get excited just going through it again in my mind. But God granted clarity and confirmation. And there was no judgment or anger around Gideon's coming back. And I like to believe that God was honoring Gideon for his reverence and his coming back to the one who could give him the true confirmation and true clarity. And Gideon was asking to see through God's lens. So, PowerPoint number 2 of the comeback. Coming back positions you for clarity and confirmation and mitigates confusion. Coming back positions you for clarity and confirmation and mitigates confusion. Both of these points you can use in your everyday relationships and everyday life, understanding that that part of coming back where he said, please don't be angry, realizing that providing that comeback positions for that clarity and confirmation and mitigates confusion. So please don't be angry, because you're providing that space and that opportunity. Now, Gideon didn't run to his men for reassurance. He didn't lean on the strategy that he was leaning on before or some secondhand voices. He came back to God with specifics. He didn't ask, like, what do you think he might have meant? Or anything like that. Sometimes we think it is wrong to keep asking. And what Gideon shows us here is that clarity is born from returning to the source. And coming back doesn't slow you down. Sometimes we think like, if I go back and I ask again, then I can't get the thing done. So I'm just going to try to get the thing done. But actually not getting clarity and trying to get the thing done is what really slows you down, because you may not do the thing right. So coming back does not slow you down. It actually keeps you from running with assumptions, and it trades confusion for confidence. Now that you're really sure, now you're confident about doing the thing. No, when you know something, then you're walking with your head up, right? You're moving in urgency. You're moving with confidence. But when you're not too sure, you kind of taking a long time and you second guessing and you asking everyone else all these questions about which way you should go. And so here Gideon shows us that there is power and not weakness in coming back. And coming back actually gives room for that integrity and space for clarity. And when we think about it, that now I almost lost my train of thought. As I was studying this, excuse me, as I was studying this, I was like, that's it right there. Like, that's good. I got enough. But when I started to go through it for myself and review it, I was not going to have 3 points. This was not a 3 point message. This was not, this is a coaching and training. And so it wasn't like, okay, I got to have 3 points. I was not gun ho on having 3 points. But as I was going through this study and preparing for today, coming back to my own clarity, a third point came out of it. And I was like, what? And that third point, PowerPoint for the comeback is coming back allows for authenticity and development. Coming back allows for authenticity and development because remember, when I mentioned Gideon's name literally meant warrior and great destroyer. And in fact, in the Bible, Judges 6:12, in the NIV version, God literally calls him the mighty warrior. When the voice of the Lord first addressed him, he doesn't say Gideon. You hear me? He says mighty warrior. Gideon didn't see himself like that. He saw himself through the lens of his association of his family and his lineage. He didn't see himself as a great warrior or mighty warrior or a great destroyer or anything as such. He came back to God to get clarity in his voice of who he was speaking to check the integrity of God's character, and to get confirmation for his assignment. And in all of those comebacks, God was patient and not angry with all of those comebacks. And he used it as an opportunity to develop Gideon to see who he truly was called to be. And he accomplished so much following those comebacks. Now, had Gideon not come back for clarity and provide space for integrity, he would not have been able to see himself for who God has truly called him to be, the great warrior, the mighty warrior. Authenticity is alignment with who you are, not with your associations. So coming back provides that space for true authenticity and transparency, which is a breeding ground for relationship building. As I mentioned early on, when I opened up that space to allow people to ask questions why, to get clarity, to understanding, allowing them to have an opportunity to take my lens and put them on, since I'm the only one who's ever seen from it, giving them the opportunity to see what I see, that broke down barriers. That created an authenticity of seeing I'm human, they're human, and we can have a conversation. That allowed for transparency for them to say, I don't know, I didn't get it, I do need to have a conversation about it. And so here is what I want to leave you with this week. Don't just, first of all, come on here and just move on and sit here. This is not the purpose of this space. I really want you to pause and sit with it as I did as I was preparing, and journal through this question. Where in my life do I need a comeback? Not for proof, but to let integrity and clarity show up. Where in my life do I need a comeback? Not for proof, but to let integrity or clarity show up. Write it down. Let God meet you in the space during your time of thinking about it. Let him meet you in the space there, and then come back. Literally, come back next week, because we are not just talking about a one-time check-in. We're building a rhythm, and that's the purpose of this space, to build a rhythm of realignment. And that really, my friend, those who are on here, is how you live, how you love, and how you lead with sustainability. And that's our time today. And so I'll say, come back and see you next Thursday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And in the meantime, be sure to subscribe for any updates. I don't do it for likes or subscriptions, but so that you can get updated on any changes or updates, what's going on. And also, FYI, this is coaching on demand, and you can find the replays on my website at bit.ly/TL Collaborative Help. all lowercase. And you can find that in my bio, or if you're on YouTube, you'll find it there as well. And also, if this helped you, share it with your crew. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but if this helped you, share it with your crew. But I want to say God bless and see you next time.